Blessed day to everyone. Welcome again to our lesson. We're going to talk about Psalms. And here we are in the book two of our discussion. And we can say that the Psalms are not just prayers and songs, they are also forms with structure. So the lesson for today, but more on that, the structure, and each Psalm is carefully arranged, some with symmetry, some with parallel lines, and some moving step by step in a straight line. We will appreciate how sums are being structured or being constructed, and studying these sums or these patterns help us understand the main message of each sum more clearly. So are you ready? So let us start. We can say that there is poetry in the Psalms. Oh yes, Psalms is a poetry. And among all biblical books, Psalm is most clearly recognized as poetry throughout history. We can also say that this reputation remains strong despite challenges of translation versus arrangement or literary theories. The poetic sense is reinforced because many psalms were written as songs for worship, as we observe it in our churches today, that we use it during our worship services. And then, aside from that, it is also accompanied by instruments like lyres, cymbals, and drums. The very name psalms, from Greek psalmos, song with a plucked instrument. So we can say that really the psalms is more on like songs of like using instruments because of the word psalm. It is from the Greek word psalmos with plucked instrument, and the Hebrew title Mesmorei Tehillim, songs of praise, highlight their musical nature. So we have learned in the previous lessons about the songs of lament, where we appreciate the honesty of the people expressing it to God, and we also now would like appreciate it because it is not just more on emotion, but they accompanied it as well with music, skills of the people of in the Old Testament and even in now, that they use their skills, especially in the music industry or in the music field, to praise and worship God. So over the centuries, poets have often created metrical English versions of the Psalms. And the Psalms are widely seen as having rhythmic flow, balance, and repetition, marking them as carefully crafted poems. So let's look on Psalms 1. What can we observe in this? Psalms 1, of course, it's in the book 1, but here, let's discuss this a little bit. Psalm 1 is a wisdom psalm that explains the outcomes of living either a righteous or a wicked life. So let's just see an example of how they structured Psalm, like this Psalm 1 and Psalms 8. It is written in the third person and presents statements rather than personal prayers. The poem is simple, using only one figurative image, a fruitful tree for the righteous and wind-blown shaft for the wicked. Though not highly original or decorative, its power lies in its clear contrast and structure. So that's why we are saying this, because we're looking on the structure of some. Later we will look on the real passage. Its power lies in the clear contrast and structure, which give lasting weight and meaning to its message about the two ways of life. So let's look on Psalms 1. Now, here's how the author structured it. How can we structure this as well? So we can see the left side and the right side, and there's a middle part. So the someone talks about happy the man who has walked counsel of the wicked, nor on the way of the sinners, nor in the session of fools has sat. Of the poem in verses 2 and 3, it says here that the poem highlights the sharp contrast between the righteous and the wicked through a carefully built structure of opposites. The psalmist uses clear transition markers like rather, verse 2, rather, and not so and thus to show that the just avoid certain actions, choose the opposite instead, and meet a different fate. The verbs in the Psalms are especially important, shaping both meaning and imagery. Yeah. The first line describes the righteous man by what he does, not by introducing his opposite, the wicked. The sequence of verbs walk, stand, sit shows a progressive movement into sin. By contrast, the righteous are defined by what they do, delight in and meditate in God's teaching. We can see here that the righteous are compared to a tree. In verse 3, he shall be like a tree planted by streams of water that gives its fruits in season. The righteous are compared to that, stable and fruitful. The wicked, however, are not subjects of action, but objects, depicted as unstable and scattered like chaff. The righteous remain still and rooted, while the wicked are restless and without control. Now, the central section, it's 7 verses, but the central section of the poem gives more space to the righteous, 2 lines, than to the wicked, 1 line. He shall be like planted, whose leaf does not wither. Not so the wicked. No? It's very good, emphasizing their lasting stability over the fleeting emptiness of the ungodly. And the psalm ends in verse 7. The psalm ends with an envelope structure echoing the beginning. For the Lord embraces the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked is lost. Wow. Uh, with It starts and ends with the wicked, but contrast them with the righteous, arranged in a chiastic pattern. Wicked, righteous, righteous, wicked. The verbs attached to the wicked show their decline, first blown away, then unable to stand, and finally perishing. Only in the final line does God appear. No, we observe here that in verses 1 to 6, there's no mention uh of more on God, but in the last verse, only in the final line does God appear as the subject, as the one who knows intimately, embraces the way of the righteous, while the way of the wicked is lost. Their path, once avoided by the righteous, is revealed to lead only to destruction. So what can we learn from someone? The poem's strength lies in the simple images of tree and shaft, along with the contrast of stillness and movement. This is not just about reward and punishment, but also about moral psychology. Sinner chase empty desires and miss the mark. Sin, that is sin, miss the mark. While the righteous learn to remain rooted in God's teaching, finding fulfillment with his law. Wow. So let's look also on Psalms chapter 8. In the Psalms, there is no like nature poetry in the modern sense, because nature is never viewed as separate from God. Instead, we can see that there is a creation poetry where the natural world is seen as a sign of the Creator's power and presence. Psalm 8 is a striking example of how poetic form presents a vision of the world that reflects Israel faith. Now, Psalm 8, you can see later, as the verses states, Psalm 8 can be seen as a paraphrase of Genesis 1, following the same order of creation and highlighting humanity's God-given authority over the world. Yet the forms differ. Genesis 1 is narrative, moving step by step through God's act of creation, while we see later Psalms 8 is not sequential but lyrical, capturing the completed creation in one moment of awe. And Psalm 8 begins after creation is complete. Like a lyric poem, it conveys the speaker's single moment of perception, marveling at the heavens and at humanity's role in creation. Through repetition, and tight poetic structure, The psalm gives the effect of simultaneity, presenting a panorama where multiple elements of creation are held together in harmony. So let's look on Psalms 8. For the leader of the Gittite, the son of David. It says here, the Hebrew text, verses 2 and 3. But let's read verse 1. O Lord, our master, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Can you imagine that? Looking at the stars in the heavens and declaring this psalm, O Lord, our master, how majestic is your name in all the earth. And it describes in 2 and 3. From the mouth of, in 2 and 3, it's a little bit obscure, especially the phrase from the mouth of babies and sucklings and its relation to foes and avengers. It's quite, what's the relation between these two? Despite this difficulty, we can see that the structural role of these lines in the psalm can still be discerned. The psalm uses an envelope structure. The opening line is repeated as the closing refrain. Verse 1 and verse 10 is the same. This circular structure emphasizes God's majesty, now enriched with meaning from the central verses. The key word to that is all. Let's go back to that. The key word is all. Call. Framing the Hebrew word call is all. Framing the psalm and stressing God's dominion over all creation, heaven, earth, creatures, and humankind, with man appointed over all. Lines 2, 3, though puzzling, as I have mentioned earlier, may connect the heavens, proclaiming of God's glory with infants' utterances. So can you imagine the psalmist uses the infants, even though we sometimes neglect them in society, but the psalmist say, infants' utterances proclaim the glory of God. This shows that creation, both vast and small, praising God. The idea of founding hints at creation imagery and possibly mythic echoes of God's subduing chaos, linking founded with established in later lines. The only verb tied to human action is in line 4, the word see. When I see your heavens, where the psalmist introduces himself marveling at the heavens. This marks a shift from cosmic to cosmic to personal perspective, descending step by step down the scale of creation. Wow, it's good. You can really appreciate the beauty of psalm. The psalm narrows focus. First, the heavens, the moon, the stars, described as the delicate work of your fingers. This unique phrase highlights God's artistry. From heaven, the focus moves down to humankind. It says that you have made us a little lower than the divine, and further down to the rest of creation under man's center of the psalm, line 5. What is man? Expresses wonder at God's care for humanity with a rare use of static parallelism. What is man? This deliberate stillness emphasizes God's regard for humankind. And we see also that God crowns humans with honor and glory, echoing divine attributes, and gives them dominion over creation. This marks the transition from heavenly order to earthly stewardship. And the psalm concludes with a catalog of animals, domestic, wild, and sea creatures, recalling Genesis chapter 1, sheep, the oxen, of all of them, the beast. The description climaxes with the dynamic image of fish moving in the sea, the only birds of the heavens and fish of the sea. The only created being is given an active verb symbolizing life's vitality within God's ordered creation. So we are stating Psalms 1 and 8. We're using Psalms 1 and 8 to see how they structure, how they form through music, and how they use this to glorify God. Now let's move on. Let's see the literary structure of Psalms. The Psalms display a wide range of structural arrangement, including symmetric, parallel, and linear patterns. So there are patterns. So what are these? These are three-part symmetries, 4, 7, 4, 5, 6, 7, and parallel patterns and linear patterns. So we will give each one an example of this. So this is how they literally structured Psalms. Let's start with the three-part symmetries. A number of Psalms exhibit a three-part symmetric configuration. The structural matching of the opening and closing units provides the psalmist opportunity to underscore certain points or themes, while the unmatched central unit generally carries the psalm's main emphasis. So let's look on Psalms 15 then. We see here, this is how we patterned a three-part symmetry. There's A, B, and A prime. Now, A prime is its mirror or answers the A, often repeating similar words or ideas or imagery, but not always identical. So in here, we see that Psalms 15, in A, brief introductory question, who can stand? And then the center is a lengthy answer versus 2 to B, 2, 5B, positive, negative, positive, negative. That's how they structure it. And then it ends with A prime, brief concluding answer. Those who do this shall never be moved. It's just uh repeat the first line, but also uh slightly different, but almost identical. All right, so this is a three-part example. So we see here that Psalm 15 ask, then answers the question, who can stand before Yahweh? And the psalm opens with a question and closes with a summary answer. The body, accented by its central position in the symmetric layout, develops the answer more fully, employing an alternating pattern to underscore both the positive and negative aspects of the kind of behavior that Yahweh finds acceptable. So those who do this thing shall never be moved. It's great. Let's look on the four-part symmetries. Four-part symmetries are common in the Book of Psalms. This structural scheme allows the psalmist to underscore by much repetition in units A and A prime, and in units B and B prime, particularly themes and points. The positions of emphasis in this configuration are generally the opening and closing units. So let's appreciate again Psalms 1. So we see here that someone contrasts the righteous and the wicked, especially their outcomes. The opening section, the righteous avoid the ways of the wicked. The closing section, the wicked will be separated from the righteous in judgment. So righteous, wicked, righteous, wicked. In the second section, we see there that the righteous are like fruitful, well-watered trees. And next to the last section, the wicked are like worthless, right shaft. So that's how they pattern Psalms 1. So the overall structure of this is it highlights the sharp contrast between the blessedness of the righteous and the futility wicked. Wow. Wow. It's you can really appreciate the book of Psalms here. How about five-part symmetries? Now, like three-part chiasmus, the five-part symmetric configuration allows the psalmist to emphasize particular ideas and themes through much repetition and to highlight the main point by placing it in the central position of the symmetry. This configuration appears to be the most popular of all arrangement schemes in the book of Psalms. Let's look on Psalms 22 on how they put the center of it. Now, we can see here that Psalm 22 is a prayer for deliverance in the face of serious illness and ruthless enemies. As the introduction says, God does not hear my cries for help, but they conclude God has heard my cry for help. Wow. And the center, we can see in the center that is the description of a dire situation, a real situation where they expressed strongly their emotion to God. The psalm symmetric scheme is utilized by the psalmist to emphasize by repetition his appeal to God for help and to draw out the contrast between his initial plight, first part, initial plight, and his final deliverance. The description of the psalmist's desperate situation is accentuated by its placement at the center. No, you can see that in verses 12 to 18, if you read that the description of the psalm's desperate situation, and it plays in the center of the psalms. So that's the 5-part symmetry. Now, how about the 6-part symmetries? One thing's clear in this example of a psalm arranged in a 6-part chiasmos or symmetry. This structural scheme, like the 4-part, offers no central position of emphasis but allows for the reiteration of important points through the repetition of important points through the repetition in matching units. So we see that it's all about repetition, parallelism. It's like parallelism, structure. So let's look on Psalms 115, how they use that. Now, the 6-part structure of Psalms 115 draws out the contrast between Yahweh, the God who protects and helps Israel, and the useless idols of the pagan nations. So you can read that in Psalm 115, how they pattern that into a 6-part symmetry. Let's move on to the 7-part symmetry. Now, in here, so common elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, are relatively scarce in the book of Psalms, the collection of Psalms. There are, however, a few clear examples of this configuration, like the 3-part and the 5-part chiasm. 7-part symmetries allow for emphasis through match repetition and through the highlighted central position. Let's look on Psalm 7. Psalm 7 underscores the contrast between the psalmist's innocence and his enemy's guilt and highlights Yahweh's role as righteous judge. The psalm center, is a thematic center of the psalm. His appeal to Yahweh to vindicate him and condemn the wicked. So the center is the plea for justice. You can see there. And declaration in the next is the declaration that Yahweh, the righteous judge, will punish evil in anger. So those are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 3-part symmetry, 4-part symmetry, 5-part symmetry, 6-part symmetry, 7-part symmetry. And now, aside from those symmetries, we also have parallel structures. Now, there are several clear examples of psalms exhibiting a parallel arrangement scheme. A parallel arrangement may be employed to establish or underscore an important pattern in the psalmist's line of reasoning. The repetitions generated by this pattern may also serve to emphasize certain points. If the structure features an unmatched final unit, the unit presents the sum's main point. And one of the example that will be giving is Psalms 100. It says here, we are familiar with this. Make a joyful noise to Yahweh. Psalms 100 is a brief but majestic praise of Yahweh. It is arranged in an alternating A B A B A prime A B A B A prime B prime pattern that emphasizes by matched repetition both the call to praise Yahweh and his praiseworthiness. So this is more on parallel lines, continuation of the pattern or repetition of the pattern. So let's see, call to praise in A, and then in the A prime is also call to praise. And reason for praise, we see in verse 3, And verse 5 as well is we also see that the reason for praise. For God's love endures forever. For God is good. His love endures forever. And aside from parallelism or parallel structure, we also have linear structures. What is this? Some of the sums appear to exhibit a simple linear configuration, the simplest and most straightforward of arrangements. The development of thought moves forward step by step, so it gives full point, the first verse, and then it just develop its point, generally culminating in a concluding unit that carries the psalm's main emphasis. So let's look on Psalms 148 and this. It is a celebrative psalm, no, a call to everything the heavens to praise Yahweh, verses 1 to 6. It begins praise Yahweh from the heavens, followed by a series of heavenly entitles and entitles ends, let them praise the name of Yahweh. Called to everything on earth to praise Yahweh. Begins praise Yahweh from the earth, followed by a series of earthly, and let them praise the name of Yahweh. And then in C, may Yahweh be praised for his people, Israel. So it's more on like straight line continuation. Psalms 148 calls upon all creation to praise Yahweh. It is arranged in three successive stanzas laid out in an ABC pattern and framed by the inclusion Hallelujah. The psalmist addresses first the heavens, then the earth, then the people of Israel in an ever-narrowing focus. The arrangement places emphasis on the final unit. Yahweh be praised, this people, of these people, Israel. So in summary of what we have learned today, we can see here that analyzing the structure of Psalms is difficult. Yeah, it's hard. Can you imagine those structures? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the linear, and the last one, parallel, and the linear. It's difficult, but important. It's valuable. And then why is it important? Because identifying internal organization clarifies the role of each part. So I'm encouraging you whenever you preach some, that not just get one verse, not just identify two verses, read the whole, and then see how the author structured it. What's the arrangement of that? Because each line corresponds a role, and each part is integral to the whole unit. And structural analysis explains seeming disorganization and repetitions, but understanding arrangement helps highlight the psalm's main themes and emphasis. As we end our lesson today, looking at the structure of the psalms helps us see their meaning better. Is this your first time hearing this? That I thought that psalm is just a normal thing, like reading the letter, reading the Ephesians, but we see that there has a style. It has a style of its own, and yet it's very unique style. What may look like repetition or disorder is often a design to highlight God's truth. By noticing these patterns, we can understand the psalm and appreciate their message for our faith. So next meeting, we will discuss more on that, especially how can we really appreciate it internally. And now we see that, oh, Psalms has repetition, but by noticing these patterns, we can clearly understand more deeply and appreciate their message for our life today. Once again, thank you so much and see you our next lesson. Bye-bye.